How a Genius Was Formed. A student in the class was not listening to the lecture. Instead, he looked at the light in his hand. He was thinking about the mysteries of the universe. How does light travel through space? His behavior deeply displeased the teacher. The teacher scolded, "Einstein, are you still too busy contemplating the secrets of the universe to solve this equation?" The young man frankly said that he had found the answer, but the teacher thought he was lying, considering his behavior disrespectful, and bluntly told him to get out of the class. And so, the young man went straight to the board and solved the problem, to the astonishment of the teacher and the students in the class. That student who was expelled from the class was one of the most creative figures in human history. His name was Albert Einstein. This was not the first time he had been expelled from class. His father was very angry about this, hoping he would apologize to the teacher and continue his studies. That would be the last chance the principal was willing to give him. But Einstein was not willing to do that. He believed that learning was not blind repetition. That was not education at all. So he proposed the idea of self-study. His father simply could not understand and told Einstein that his business had gone bankrupt. The family would move to Milan. Except Einstein did not know Italian, so he had to finish his studies here. This was very painful for him. The mechanical learning method made him feel depressed. This educational model was so rigid that it constantly challenged his limits. The ideas of a genius are destined to be different. That day, Einstein decided to leave the class. Not long after, he went to Switzerland, citing a nervous breakdown. He found his father and spoke his mind, that he had decided to go to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich, ETH Zurich. His father thought he was imaginative, wanting to enter university directly before graduating from high school. This was unrealistic, but Einstein's attitude was very firm, insisting he would pass the exam in June, and his father could only reluctantly agree. Time flew by, and the June exam arrived. The entrance exam content included literature, French, zoology, and botany, plus politics, which made Einstein completely panic because he had never studied these subjects. Seeing other students answer the questions very quickly, he felt even more helpless. He did not start answering the questions until it was time for the physics paper. After the exam, Professor Heinrich Weber announced his results. He had passed the math and science sections with flying colors. What was more surprising was that Einstein had taught himself everything, but he had completely failed the other exams. Although he had anticipated his results, he was still very disappointed. He asked the professor if an exception could be made, as he loved studying physics. But that's not how a university works. Einstein also confessed that he hadn't attended school and considered politics to be frivolous. He only believed that mathematical equations would last forever. Although Professor Weber knew that Einstein was very interested in science, it didn't help him pass this exam. The professor recommended him to study at the Aarau Cantonal School with a friend of his, and he would be admitted for a year. In addition, he had to learn some French to come back and retake the exam later. The two sides agreed to the deal. That's how Einstein came to the Windteller's house. Mr. Windteller was a teacher of Greek and history at the Aarau Cantonal High School. That year could be said to be the happiest time of Einstein's youth, because here he met his first girlfriend, Marie. During dinner, Einstein expressed his views on the creation of all things in nature in front of the family members. Everyone else laughed, but Marie appreciated his views. Newly in class, the teacher was explaining Newton's second law and posed a question to prove the law. While the students were still thinking, Einstein provided the answer, while also raising his own new questions and ideas. I am imagining a ball moving in deep space, with no stars or planets around. Acceleration is the derivative of velocity with respect to time. How do we know the ball is moving if there is nothing to compare its motion to? In other words, in its own space, it can be considered to be at rest. Seeing the disbelieving faces of his classmates, he thought he would be kicked out again. But to his surprise, this time he received the lecturer's praise. What is the difference between a genius and an ordinary person? His uncle's factory had been in trouble because the machinery and equipment had been problematic for several months. When Einstein looked at the drawings, he knew what the problem was. Oh, why not adjust the length of the conductor and change the speed of the rotor? After Einstein adjusted a few things, the machine restarted smoothly. This also greatly surprised his uncle. His uncle proposed that he become an engineer in the factory, but Einstein had no intention of becoming an engineer. He couldn't bear to devote his creativity to manufacturing industries. He hated the daily goal of increasing income. His ideal was to become a physicist. This confused his father. He never thought that his son would be so highly regarded by future generations. And so, the father and son had an argument. In the blink of an eye, the entrance exam to ETH Zurich had arrived. This time, Einstein no longer felt disheartened. He answered the questions calmly. After the exam, he went to Professor Weber's office again with an anxious heart. The professor sat down casually, and what he held in his hand was Einstein's scores. Everything was very good, until literature, botany, but there was a small problem with the French essay. Vocabulary at a basic level, simplified syntax, no use of the simple future tense. But he still successfully got into ETH Zurich. Just as he was about to attend his first physics class, Einstein met the person who would change his life. Without her, perhaps Einstein would not have been honored by future generations as the greatest physicist of the 20th century. She was Einstein's first wife, named Mileva Merrick. She was also the only girl whose math score was higher than his. She was a girl with a congenital disability, and this aroused Einstein's great interest. Professor Weber also noticed Einstein's thoughts, but he did not open his mouth to reprimand him, instead turning his attention to Mileva. His words made her quite confused. If heat is the result of the motion of fundamental molecules and Newton's laws of motion are reversible, then what explains irreversibility? In this class, we will only deal with what has been proven, without the existence of molecules. Einstein immediately stood up to speak for Mileva. When the professor wanted him to stop his behavior, Einstein deliberately threw his pencil case on the ground to express his point. This behavior made the professor very angry. Einstein later sought out Mileva. He thought she would pay attention to him for standing up for her in class. But what he received was Mileva's indifference. She was even angry at Einstein's persistent attitude. It turned out that Mileva had suffered psychological trauma as a child. She had shown great talent from a young age. Although she had never studied physics, she had discovered the phenomenon of light refraction. Her father did not want his daughter's intelligence to be buried. He found the top science school in Eastern Europe, hoping the principal would allow his daughter to take the entrance exam. Of course, the explanations of his daughter's abilities were not taken seriously by the principal. The principal's words left Mileva's father unable to argue, but he still did not give up. He told Mileva to show the book she was reading to the principal. At first, the principal was not interested at all. So Mileva presented the concepts of fields and potential energy, as well as their practical applications in mathematics. After listening, the principal changed his mind. In the social context of that time, there was always discrimination against women. Society thought that women did not need to know too much. No one wanted to sit at the same table with her. Finally, Mileva met a classmate who was a gentleman and was willing to sit by her side. With her different abilities, Mileva often showed her test papers to her male classmates. She also hoped to be favored more by him. Finally, one day, she gathered all her courage to express her feelings. However, he politely refused. After receiving the answer, Mileva turned to leave, but in a flash, she discovered that the young man was imitating her walk. It was a humiliation that made the classmates laugh one after another. Mileva could only sob and leave like a clown. From then on, Mileva always kept a distance from the opposite sex. No one could enter her heart again. Only until Einstein appeared. When Professor Weber found Einstein in the library, he saw that he and Mileva were very close. This made him a little worried because Einstein was the smartest student he had ever met. He didn't want him to focus on pursuing girls. He warned, "You need to be mindful of where you place your attention. The library is not a place for courtship." One evening, Mileva took the initiative to find Einstein, but his roommate told her that he was having dinner at his fiancée's house. This hurt Mileva's heart again. Seeing the wound on Einstein's hand, his girlfriend Marie was very worried and asked what had happened. Einstein said he was injured while doing an experiment. He also talked about a lot of physics terms that Marie couldn't understand. She was also sad that physics was not her forte. That's when Marie realized something was wrong. She took the initiative to kiss Einstein. However, two people with nothing in common could not be together. When Einstein returned to the dormitory, he saw Mileva's book. This made him very excited. He sought her out and expressed his feelings, even taking the initiative to kiss her. But Mileva thought that there would be no good outcome between her and Einstein. She did not want to be the third person. To avoid Einstein's entanglement, she decided to transfer to the University of Heidelberg. From then on, Einstein became more focused on his studies, which also made him more confused. He directly embarrassed Professor Weber in class, which also led to his miserable life later. The professor said that in his many years of teaching, no one had ever been so rude. He would never tolerate this happening. This was not the first time Einstein had acted so smart-alecky, and the professor had lost his patience with him. He could only tell him frankly that he was a real troublemaker. On the other hand, Mileva was asking a professor to look at a paper she wrote, hoping he would write a letter of recommendation for her to take the entrance exam to the University of Heidelberg. But the professor refused, because the University of Heidelberg would not grant degrees to women. This made Mileva very helpless, and she could only return to ETH Zurich once more. Mileva's return also drove Einstein completely wild. This time, Maliva could no longer resist Einstein's love. When they woke up the next day, they realized it was almost time for class. Maliva wanted to get dressed and go to class, but Einstein thought it was unnecessary as long as they passed the exam in the coming months. So they stayed in the room, not even attending Professor Weber's physics class. This made the professor completely give up on Einstein. He had realized that Einstein, like all other precious gems, was obnoxious and self-important. The professors discussed at length the current attitude of this young genius. A good life is always short. Maliva accidentally discovered letters from Einstein's girlfriend, Marie. It turned out that Einstein had not broken up with Marie at all. This made Maliva feel that she had been deceived. Immediately, an argument broke out between the two. Maliva was clearly the more disadvantaged one in the current situation. To save all this, Einstein wrote a letter to Marie suggesting they break up. Then he borrowed his roommate's book to make it up to Maliva and saw that the exams were approaching. Maliva could only accept all of this. Although they were both geniuses, they had not attended class for months. The results were also clear that Einstein barely passed, but Maliva was not so lucky. However, that was not the worst thing. 3 months later, Maliva returned to her hometown in Serbia. Her father looked at his pregnant daughter, unable to believe it all. On November 8, 1895, in a laboratory, a man was conducting an experiment as usual. When he wrapped a cathode ray tube in black cardboard, an unexpected phenomenon was discovered. In the distance, there was a green light. At first, he thought it must be an illusion from observing this mysterious fluorescent substance in a dark room all day. So he repeated the discharge experiment, and the mysterious fluorescent ray appeared again. At this point, he realized this might be a new type of ray. He and his wife conducted a test. When the photograph was developed, there was a shocking scene. The bones of the hand were clearly visible. Even the wedding ring was transparent. This was because the ring completely blocked the rays. It would set a precedent for medical imaging technology. And he was Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen, the discoverer of X-rays. For this important discovery, Röntgen won the first Nobel Prize in Physics in 1901. People also call X-rays Röntgen rays. However, at this time, Einstein didn't care about any of that. Due to debts and his child about to be born, he needed to earn money from milk powder. He was invited for a teaching job. After arriving at the interview location, the professor looked at his resume and thought he was the most suitable candidate. He would submit his name to the committee for approval, but before that, he needed a letter of recommendation. To get this job, he found Professor Weber, hoping he could write a letter of recommendation. But Professor Weber was no longer interested in his future. He even wrote many letters that were not favorable to Einstein. Einstein had once publicly disrespected him. How could he be in the mood to help him anymore? This made Einstein very angry. His friend said there was a vacancy at the patent office. The job was very simple, just being an examiner. But Einstein considered himself a scientist, so that was too demeaning. In desperation, he became a physics tutor. But the hypotheses of atoms and quantum mechanics seemed to confuse the boy. The result was even worse. The boy's father angrily scolded Einstein because his son's grades were even lower than before he started tutoring. So he recited a series of things he had taught the boy, to the point that the father couldn't understand them either. This was the nth time Einstein had been fired. Now, he had to be careful even when returning to his apartment, for fear of being discovered by the landlord demanding rent. Living in turmoil, he could only secretly go to the streets to advertise for private tutoring. Friends advised him to work at the patent office, but he considered himself a scientist, not just some clerk. He just needed a little time to finish his new paper. Feeling exhausted, he returned to his apartment only to find a man named Maurice Solovine waiting. He had come here to study physics. Later, Einstein went to his home to teach. Also attending the lecture was Conrad Habicht. Both were interested in physics. Then, Conrad asked a question. This morning, I was in the bathtub and tapped a hairbrush against the side, creating waves on the surface of the water. What created those waves? Einstein said. It's vibrations propagating in the form of waves. In this case, the medium is being disturbed. Sound waves travel through the air to your eardrums. Unlike light waves, material waves travel better through dense matter. That's why when they put their ears to the rails, they can hear the sound of a locomotive miles away. As everyone fell silent and listened intently, they were all impressed by Einstein's talent. At this time, his first child was born. After hearing the news, Einstein prepared to say goodbye to Maurice. But Maurice stopped Einstein, wanting to keep him in Bern. Of course, Einstein had his own reasons, and his father was gradually weakening. Later, his father officially passed away. At the memorial service, he received a telegram. It turned out that Einstein's first child had fallen ill and passed away. Almost at the same time, Einstein lost both his father and his first child. But his sister said this might be a good thing for him and for Maliva. Unbound, they were both free to pursue their dreams. Maliva's father was also persuading her. This might be the second chance God had given her to continue her studies. But Einstein later met Maliva. He did not want to go against his father's last words about his debt to Maliva. So, he proposed to Maliva at the train station. After that, they had a smooth marriage. To support his family, Einstein had to take a job he once hated the most, becoming a clerk at the patent office. However, it was this very experience that helped give birth to 4 papers that would mark a new era. What's even more incredible is that these 4 papers were written while Einstein was working at the patent office. In March of the same year, he went to his professor with a paper proving that he could use Planck's constant to explain the photoelectric effect, proving the duality of light. But the professor thought he was delusional, wanting to argue for his doctoral thesis that they had been mistaken about a fundamental law of physics since 1678. After that, he had no choice but to return home. He knew his ideas were right, but he couldn't convince the arrogant old masters in the academy. Who cares about the opinion of a clerk at the patent office? Maliva comforted him, telling him to leave the professor alone. He should just publish the paper so that more important scientists would recognize his achievements. But Einstein said his work was tiring. He had no time for research. Maliva spoke up to help him. So the couple stayed up all night in the lab, finally completing the first paper, the quantum theory of light. But after sending it out, there was no response. Max Planck, who was known as the father of quantum mechanics at the time, read Einstein's paper. He thought it was impossible. His evidence is quite impressive, but the paper did not cause any stir in the academic world. But Einstein's streak of achievements had only just begun. The couple once again devoted themselves to research. When they were tired, they would have a cup of coffee to refresh themselves. When sugar was added to the coffee, it continuously dissolved with lots of bubbles rising. This phenomenon gave Einstein inspiration. Water surrounds the glucose and tears it from the sugar crystal. If more sugar is added, the coffee becomes thicker. If they could calculate the osmotic pressure, perhaps they could deduce the exact number to prove the existence of molecules. To prove the existence of molecules, Einstein needed more time for research. So, after work, he quietly took out a piece of paper and prepared to study, but was discovered and criticized by his boss. He said Einstein was already privileged to have this position. Einstein went to his friend Marcel, complaining about having too much work. He had no time for himself and needed time to study. Marcel asked him what help he needed, and Einstein suggested he needed an assistant, and his friend Michel Besso was the best candidate. Then his second paper was published, proving the existence of molecules. But Professor Planck still rejected it. He didn't even remember Einstein. Just like that, his paper fell into uselessness again. Einstein knew that a preliminary idea was not enough. He needed data to conquer them. So, he came up with a new idea, to calculate the motion of molecules in 3-dimensional space. But these calculations were too much. Even with Maliva's help, it would still take a lot of time. Einstein's mother always believed that Maliva only needed to take care of her own children, not help him with scientific matters. This made Maliva very angry. She was a very intelligent woman. Being just a housewife would be very frustrating for her. Family conflicts made it impossible for him to concentrate. He could only go to the patent office to rest and work. His friend Michel saw his calculation formulas. He felt it was unnecessary to calculate from a 3-dimensional perspective. The amount of calculation would drive him crazy. He suggested that Einstein should build a model, which would be much simpler and would also prove the point more intuitively. The two acted immediately. After that, Einstein's third paper on the theory of Brownian motion was officially born. But this paper also did not cause any waves in the academic world. Perhaps it was time to return to a normal life. Seeing his colleagues at the patent office busy working to make a living, he was also confused, thinking that perhaps this was his best return. His friend Michel saw that Einstein was dejected and came to comfort him. The two briefly exchanged ideas about Newton's and Maxwell's theories. If one tried to synchronize the two theories into one, that is motion, what would happen is the clocks would synchronize because space and time are absolute. But for that to be true, light would have to speed up or slow down to keep the clock synchronized. Light only travels at one speed, so either Maxwell is right or Newton is right. Perhaps for this reason, this gave Einstein another new idea, and his masterpiece, the theory of relativity, would be born from this. While playing with his son, he glanced at the clock, turned on the toy train. He had a new idea again. He hurried to find his friend Michel. He asked Michel to close his eyes. Imagine you are looking down at the railroad tracks, and there is a fast train running in front of you at an unprecedented speed. Now, can you imagine there will be 2 lightning bolts, 100 meters apart, striking at the same time? If you were standing between the train, Will the two lightning bolts strike at the same time? Michelle's answer was at the same time. But Einstein asked Michelle to continue imagining being on the train. And when the two lightning bolts appeared, it was not at the same time, because Michelle was moving towards one and away from the other. That's how one can experience the same event in different ways. Einstein concluded, time is not absolute. He couldn't contain his excitement when he returned home to tell Maliva his thoughts. 300 years ago, Galileo came up with his principle of relativity. Newton built on these theories to come up with his own laws. There is gravity and absoluteness. But no one took into account the true nature of light. So, Einstein came up with his own principle of relativity. Maliva also felt it was incredible. This would redefine the universe. All their efforts would be rewarded. Einstein asked Maliva to help him prove it mathematically. Soon, his masterpiece, the special theory of relativity, was officially born. This time, he was not ignored. This is the fourth paper this year. I have never seen a paper like this. My name is Max Lau. I have come here under the orders of Professor Max Planck. He has greatly admired Einstein's research achievements, so they want to help Einstein further develop his career. And so he was hired as a lecturer. But there were very few students in his class because he was very nervous on the podium, so some students thought he was just showing off. Someone even left the class immediately. This made Einstein feel very embarrassed. He suggested switching to extracurricular teaching. While walking with the classmates, he would answer their questions directly. This method made the students more comfortable and happy, attracting more and more students to join the class. Then, a student asked a question about Einstein's special theory of relativity. Special relativity only applies to constant speed. So what if the velocity changes? At this point, Einstein could not answer this question. In the end, he could only find some excuse to leave. This troubled Einstein for a while. Special relativity only applies within a certain range. However, speed is not stable. The world is rotating, and this is a type of acceleration. Einstein's theory was incomplete, which left him nearly stuck. And what's worse, he was invited to present this theory at a conference in Salzburg. This made him feel timid, wanting to cancel the meeting. But the professor said that running away was not a solution. He needed to face it to overcome his fear. So Einstein went to the meeting with an anxious heart. Just as he was going down the elevator, he suddenly had an inspiration. He was greeted by Professor Planck and Minkowski when he stepped out. Both were big names in the physics industry at the time. The conference was crowded with people who came to hear Einstein explain the special theory of relativity. This made him feel even more uncomfortable. He couldn't explain an incomplete theory in front of everyone. So he put down the manuscript in his hand and talked about the issues Planck often mentioned. Today I want to talk to you all about something other than relativity. In short, much of what we think we know about light is wrong. After he finished speaking, there was complete silence. Only Professor Planck stood up to ease the awkward atmosphere. It also helped Einstein survive this crisis. Later, the Minister of Education of the Austro-Hungarian Empire sent an invitation to Einstein, hoping he would become a professor of theoretical physics at the Charles Ferdinand University. This pleased Einstein a little. He happily agreed. While packing his luggage, he talked to Jacob about what happened in the elevator. In fact, he had imagined something very strange. When the elevator was falling, he was just floating inside the shaft as if he had no weight at all. Because a falling person does not feel their own weight. So that's exactly what gravity is. Acceleration and gravity are the same. This was the idea he had missed in his complete theory of relativity. It was this breakthrough that laid the foundation for the formation of the general theory of relativity later. The first Solvay conference in 1911 was held in Brussels. The Solvay conference was a discussion conference in the field of physical chemistry founded by Ernest Solvay, a Belgian industrialist, in the early 20th century. The people invited to this meeting were all the top figures at the time, and Einstein was also invited. At the meeting, he spotted Madame Marie Curie. In 1903, she and her husband Pierre Curie discovered the radioactive element, which laid the foundation for modern radiochemistry and made great contributions to humanity. The two won the Nobel Prize in Physics together. However, at this time, Curie was caught in a storm of public opinion. No one wanted to approach her to communicate. The reason was that she was going around Paris with a married man. It was a terrible disgrace to Curie's late husband. While people thought she should have been asked to leave the conference, only Einstein took the initiative to greet her. "I am Albert Einstein, and I have heard some rumors about you. The rumor is that you will win another Nobel Prize. Don't worry about them. Their jokes are worse than their manners." Both were true followers of science, so it was easy for them to talk. After that day, they had many more conversations about science. Curie said, suppose Einstein is right about acceleration and gravity, he had better prepare for immense resistance from his colleagues. To complete his own theory, Einstein intended to return to the Federal Institute in Zurich. There, his friend Grossman could help him with the mathematical proof. On the way, he came up with his thought experiment of the elevator. But Michel was not sure it was right. However, at this time Einstein realized his idea had brought another wonderful result. Gravity can bend light. This was a completely new concept for the entire physics community. Even if Einstein was right, he would need a very large gravitational force to prove it. But Einstein thought that the sun's gravity was the best choice. Then, he demonstrated for Michel. Imagine that log is now a particle of light, and consider the river as space. That barge will be the sun. Now you can see that the sun's gravity changes the shape of space. Michel also recognized Einstein's uniqueness, but perhaps he had gone too far and thought it best for Einstein to find a good astronomer to help them. After the birth of special relativity, Einstein was still not satisfied and tried to extend the scope of the principle of relativity to non-inertial systems. He found Professor Planck, hoping to be introduced to some astronomers. But Planck was a little reluctant because his idea was too strange and could very well be proven wrong. But Einstein thought he was right. Even if he was wrong, he wanted to try it. Otherwise, they would never progress. Planck still said there was no need to risk one's life for this, and that there is a fine line between genius and a joke. But Einstein persisted with his own idea. That night, he had dinner at his cousin's house. His cousin's thoughtful care made Einstein feel a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. This was something he had never experienced with his wife, Maliva. Later, Einstein returned to Zurich and met Grossman. Then, Einstein returned to Zurich and met Grossman. Grossman said that 4 is a special number. There are 4 elements in the world: earth, air, water, and fire. The compass has 4 directions: east, west, south, north. The soul also has 4 levels: thinking, feeling, perception, and intuition. Perhaps space has more than 3 dimensions. It was these words that made Einstein think. At this time, Professor Planck came to Einstein's house to announce that he had found an astronomer. But Einstein asked the professor to look at a spider on a disk. Then a simple question was asked: what is the ratio of the circumference to the diameter? The professor answered pi without hesitation. This was obviously correct, but Einstein felt this did not happen for the spider because, relatively speaking, the circumference along the direction of rotation is more curved. At this point, the professor looked confused, not knowing what Einstein wanted to say. He said, "This little creature has given me the key to forming the general theory of relativity. It cannot be done with 3 dimensions." At this point, Einstein had the idea for the general theory of relativity, but he lacked the necessary mathematical foundation to build it. He sought out Professor Fritz Haber, hoping to recruit him as an ally in their mission. Einstein wanted to prove his general theory of relativity in the form of an astronomical photograph. Mercury is the planet closest to the Sun and different from the other 7 planets. Mercury's orbit does not fit Newton's theory. Einstein believed that Mercury's orbit was affected by the gravity of an undiscovered planet. We can imagine the vast universe filled with invisible phenomena. This curved grid is like threads that surround anything with mass, causing the planet's orbit to change with each cycle. Einstein thought that when starlight passes the Sun, this phenomenon would happen again. But this conjecture could only be proven during a solar eclipse, because they could not see the small stars during the day, but could see them more clearly when the sun's rays were blocked. During an eclipse, one could photograph the position of the stars during the day, then compare it with their position at night. This would prove that the sun's gravity can bend the light of the stars. It must be said that Einstein's imagination was truly unparalleled. Professor Haber was very impressed by his intelligence. There would be a total solar eclipse in Russia in a few months, but the cost of such a test was not small. He hoped that the professors could help him get funding for his research at the Prussian Academy of Sciences. Although the imagination was beautiful, the reality was always cruel. After Einstein explained his idea at the Academy of Sciences, it was fiercely opposed by Philipp Leonard. In the end, Einstein could only get a grant of 2,000 marks. Such a small grant would not even allow the astronomer Erwin Freundlich to reach the Russian border. This made Einstein very angry, but Elsa said she could introduce Gustav Krupp to him. He was an industrialist, also one of the patrons of the Prussian Academy of Sciences. But Krupp knew that many professors thought Einstein's theory was just a pipe dream. Einstein insisted that this expedition would revolutionize science. Fortunately, Krupp liked people with opinions like him, so he agreed to support it. Although everything seemed to be developing in a good direction, an accident happened. Someone noticed that Einstein's theory was not entirely accurate. Maliva returned home and wanted to report this news to Einstein, but she was interrupted. Einstein was angry because Maliva had spoken ill of him in front of the children, even asking her to leave the room. Feeling treated this way, Maliva said nothing more to Einstein. The next day, Freundlich would board a train to Russia. They would photograph the total solar eclipse to prove Einstein's general theory of relativity. Everything would be clear by the end of the month, and then the whole world would praise Einstein's great achievements. But the unexpected happened. Germany was declaring war on Russia. At this time, they were crossing the Russian border, so the group was quite panicked. The result was not surprising. They were taken to a prison camp. Because the group was captured, Einstein sought Professor Planck's help, but he couldn't do anything either. This required negotiations between the two countries. The war dragged on. Time passed quickly, the total solar eclipse arrived, and Freundlich could only watch from prison. A few months later, the three were rescued. Einstein was excited to share this news with Maliva. Maliva said it might be a good thing, because the basic principles of his general theory of relativity were wrong. At first, Einstein didn't believe it. It wasn't until Maliva presented the evidence that Einstein was startled. However, this also caused the relationship between the two to enter a frozen state. Affected by the war in 1914, Germany's ammunition depot was only sufficient for 6 months. Dr. Rathenau decided to establish a military department specializing in scientific innovation. He needed the support of all the top scientists here to research high-tech weapons. He also asked everyone to sign the war manifesto. Only Einstein did not sign, because he felt that scientists had a mission to unravel the mysteries of the world, not to find new ways to destroy it. When he got home, Einstein told Elsa about it, saying that he would not follow the crowd and build weapons. In the same year, Einstein met Professor David Hilbert. He was the leading mathematician of his time. He was very interested in Einstein's theory of relativity, so Einstein thought Hilbert would support him in completing the argument for his theory. But the professor said he could do it alone. This was unacceptable to Einstein. He also discussed this issue with Planck. He also did not accept this and advised Einstein to quickly complete his project. And so the silent war between the two officially began. Einstein did a bold thing at the Prussian Academy in 1915. He would present the history of the equations of general relativity in class. This amount of calculation was enormous, and he planned to help himself calculate the history of the equations faster than Professor Hilbert. He could not accept the theory he proposed falling into the hands of others. An invisible war began between the two. Hilbert was the leading mathematician at the time, so his calculation speed was certainly much faster than Einstein's. Einstein had no advantage in this matter, but there was one thing Hilbert couldn't compare with. Einstein had a deeper understanding of general relativity. No one could match him at this point. As the number of following students increased, he also knew he had to be faster to stay one step ahead. He barely ate or slept. Elsa was very worried about him, but Einstein said he was about to make a big discovery. His friend, Michel, had written 5 letters to inform him that Maliva was sick and hospitalized, so the children were being cared for by him. But Einstein said that after he finished his calculations, he would take care of the children. Then Professor Planck received a letter from Hilbert. Einstein looked at the contents of the letter. He knew he had lost. He had completed the final equation. Planck comforted him. The theory was still Einstein's. No one could take it from him. But life is not just stories. Einstein went to Switzerland by train to visit his children, but because of the war, all Swiss borders were closed. This train needed to return the way it came, and this also made the children resentful of Einstein. Returning home, he lay on the bed, tiredly looking at the light bulb on the ceiling. Suddenly, another inspiration struck. The light bulb became the center of the star's movement, like the sun. Einstein hurriedly got out of bed, found the letter from Hilbert again. Looking at the notice in the letter, he smiled happily because Hilbert had made a mistake. He went back to the university, began to calculate the equations of general relativity in front of all the teachers and students. This time, he not only proved the precession of Mercury's perihelion, but the correct gravitational field equation was also derived. It was completed to the applause of everyone. The birth of the general theory of relativity is one of the greatest achievements of human thought, also making Einstein the greatest physicist of the 20th century. In 1919, at the instigation of the British astronomer Arthur Eddington, 2 expeditions sent by the British went to 2 places to observe the total solar eclipse. After careful study, the final conclusion was that starlight is indeed deflected by about 1.7 arcseconds when near the sun. The Royal Society and the Royal Astronomical Society officially read the observation report, confirming the conclusion of the general theory of relativity to be correct. However, after this theory was established, Einstein was still not satisfied. He wanted to generalize the general theory of relativity so that it would not only include the gravitational field, but also the electromagnetic field. He believed this was the 3rd stage in the development of relativity. After 1928, he turned to the study of pure mathematics. He tried various methods, but none yielded significant results. In the 30 years from 1925 to 1955, apart from the problems of the completeness of quantum mechanics, gravitational waves, and the problems of motion in general relativity, Einstein devoted almost all of his scientific creative experience to the exploration of the unified field theory. In 1937, with the cooperation of two assistants, he derived the equations of motion from the gravitational field equations of general relativity, continuing to reveal the unity between space-time and the motion of matter. This was a major development in general relativity. It was also the last major achievement Einstein made in his scientific creative activities. In his later years, Einstein was very isolated in the physics community. On April 18, 1955, Einstein was diagnosed with an aortic aneurysm. At midnight on the 18th, he passed away in Princeton after the aortic aneurysm ruptured. Until the day before he died, he was still in bed preparing to continue his mathematical calculations on the unified field theory. After Einstein's death, his brain was removed by a doctor named Thomas Harvey. He hoped the neuroscience community would be able to study it in the future to discover why Einstein was so intelligent. The brain weighed 1230 grams. And the story ends here.